to Spooky Stories with India, the author. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story about the Mino. So the character's name is Ballah. I don't know if many of you know her. She is mentioned in Roseline, but it's like really quick, so you might not really know her. So a quick background to Ballah. She is a dark one, which is a vampire, for those of you who don't know. She was in the Mino army, which is a group of female warriors in the Dahomey tribe, which is a really old African tribe way back in the day. But it's really big because it was just this group of female warriors and they were like taking out everybody. So she's a part of that group, and this is her story of how she became a dark one, basically. Okay, so we're gonna start. The story is called The Princess of Dahomey. Gotta set the mood, sorry. Alright. Each soldier assembled at the foot of their king, all of them women, in light-plated armor and huge, deadly weapons. They stood tall and straight, patiently waiting for King Wadbaja to make his announcement. Everyone, except for a raven-haired soldier at the very end of the line. She was the shortest of them all, but ambition pushed her chest out and flared her angry nostrils. She always had a hunger to be heard, and being kept waiting was an unknown concept. She and her fellow warriors had been standing in the same spot for over 30 minutes, and she refused to tolerate it anymore without an excuse. It had been a long time since the king called the elite group of female warriors together like this, and she was dying to know why. Why, when the war had finally settled and peace loomed over Dahomey, why would the king need their talents? Finally, after not much thought, she opened her irritated mouth to make her inquiry, taking a liberated step forward. "My king, Ballah, get back in line," the order hissed from a woman on the other end of the line of warrior women. Her armor was colored with blues and golds of a chief, and she and Ballah exchanged glares, their eyes the exact same color and shape, but that was about as far as the similarities went with them. Despite being sisters, they couldn't look more different, and their contrast in features was matched by their contrast in personality. "Hangbi, what I need to say is important," Ballah said, with her chin held arrogantly in the sky and her eyes like slits. "It is nearly sundown and we have no news. What is the meaning of this meeting, Your Majesty? I implore you," she addressed the king. King Wadbaja sat on his throne with his hands holding each other. In pensive thought, he eyed the two girls with amusement, a rare expression to see on his harsh face, worn with battle scars. He had always been more of a warrior than a king, but today he was dressed in the finest of the royal garments. His long agba shimmered with blue and gold Dahomey crests embroidered into it. At sunset, all will be clear. The king's low bass rumbled through the room like a captivating drum solo. This was not enough for Ballah. She had fought long and hard to end the war. She needed to know if it was for nothing. She had expected to return to peace, not another battle. "My king, please," she began, but smoke filled the room. Not a regular smoke. It was controlled, rolling around the ground in a hiss until it congealed by the king's side. The king looked over. "Welcome, new friend," he announced, as the smoke began to create a form. A young, pale man with brown curly hair, freckles, and sharp canine teeth erupted from the smoke, which slithered into a cloak around his body. "Your welcome is most humble, I see," the young man said, looking out at the women in front of him. His eyes lingered on Ballah's angry face. "What is the meaning of this, father?" Hanbi stepped forward with her head cocked sideways. "Forgive me for expressing myself so, but he is not of our kind," Ballah sputtered. "Not of our kind? He is not even alive," she spat. "For the love of gods, that thing is no baleful. We have a vampire standing in our midst." "Father, you have been seduced by the devil. I shall revenge you." Ballah's hands moved quickly to grab the sword strapped to her back, but before she lifted her hand to even attempt to move, the young man had sprinted across the room, pulled one sword out of her holster, and held it at her throat. "Is that how you treat your guests?" the vampire asked. "That is how I treat the devil," Ballah huffed, with as much vehemence that she could muster, clenching her teeth as she stared down the blade of her own sword. She could feel the sharp edge of the blade against her bare throat. The man chuckled. "No, I'm much worse than the devil, princess. You are mine. I am your new owner," he said, lowering the blade and turning to the king. "I'll take this one." He turned back to Ballah and smiled. "She has much fight in her, and her curves signify that she will be a nice bedmate as well." He used the end of the blade to lift the end of her dress. Cold hatred ran through Ballah's body at the thought of becoming a slave to a demon like the pale man. "I would never." "Mino," the king addressed the warriors, cutting Ballah off mid-sentence. "Take her to the chambers and prepare her for her travels." He raised him from his throne and left the room. The warriors looked to Hanbi, who still stood facing her father's empty throne with a torn look on her face. Her eyes told a lifetime of grief as she turned to Ballah. In that moment, Ballah knew exactly what she would say. She would follow orders, as Hanbi always have. True to her person, Ballah took off before she could even hear Hanbi give the order. Thankful that the vampire did not follow her, and that she had been closest to the door, she was a mile ahead of them in no time. She would escape to the jungle. The spirits would protect her there. Her feet pushed against the dirt like a cheetah chasing its prey. She didn't stop until she found a pond, calling out to the gods for protection. She dived in and swam to the bottom. The world seemed to turn upside down, and though the ground was wet, she was no longer engulfed in the water. The water was now spinning around her in a whirlwind, creating a gust of wind. Not completely sure what happened, she gathered her senses. She needed to do something quickly to change her fate. She could not let the devil take a hold of her. She knew that she couldn't outrun the Mino warriors forever. She would need to return, but she refused to be a slave with no power. Ballah removed her armor, then all of her clothes, and threw them off to the side. She picked up a handful of wet soil and made markings all over her body. In her peripheral, she saw a frog that must have gotten swept to the bottom of the pond amid her jump. She snatched it up and sat cross-legged on the ground. She waved her hand over the frog, whispering to the spirits until the frog stopped struggling to free itself. She placed it in front of her. Then she grabbed another handful of dirt, waved another whispering hand over it, and it fashioned itself into a cup. "Oh, Damballa, serpent spirit of the cosmos!" The whirlwind flew faster. The night sky seemed to swirl with it, like she was no longer on Earth, but in another dimension entirely. Her eyes were focused on the small frog laid out in front of her, frozen in place, and in her hands, she conjured a sharp dagger. The frog kept an alarming eye on it. "Come to me in my time of need, Ballah." She picked up the cup, bowed her head, and called on the power of the spirits once more. Magically, the cup filled with white rum and cowrie shells. "Accept this gift in exchange for access to your power." The wind whipped harder and harsher, and soon the whooshing of the water became a low hiss. Ballah's eyes opened, and she slammed the dagger down into the tree frog's belly. As little as the frog was, its blood splashed with the force of her blow. Ballah gave a sharp intake of breath at the sound, and for the slightest of moments, very quickly, she thought that perhaps this had been a bad idea. As quickly as that thought came, a serpent slithered out of the water whirlwind. It was small and colorful serpent with wise eyes. It coiled quickly and snatched up the dead frog, lifting it up and swallowing it whole. Ballah watched as the frog left a lump in the snake's throat until it dissolved completely. "Ballah," she whimpered with fear, "forgive me for calling on you and interrupting your peace, but I am in trouble." The serpent slithered around her naked body as if she was its next meal. She shook, fear taking over her senses and freezing her in place. "The spirits are nothing to mess with," a voice echoed in her head, as she remembered what Hanbi always told her. But it was too late to turn back now. She was too close to what she wanted to give up now. She was sure that this was the solution to her problem. If it were not the spirits, would not have been so generous with their gifts. "My father has sold me to the devil," she cried. The serpent rose until it stared at her in the face. She mustered as much courage as she could not to flinch away from the red eyes and sharp fangs. "In a few hours, I will be slave to the Dark King. I beg of you to give me access so that I may help and be helpful to him in some way, so that one day I may regain my freedom." The serpent snapped at her and she fell backwards. Quickly, she threw her whole body on the ground. "Oh, powerful Laos, use my life as collateral, I beg of you." The serpent snapped vehemently at her bowed head, hissing as if it was throwing a fit. "Please, Lao, please. If I go without your power, I will be killed or used in the most inhumane ways. Please, I don't want to be a slave for the rest of my life." The purest tears she had ever shed fell from her eyes. The tone of the hiss was softer this time. The serpent towered its body and licked at the rum and shells. Ballah thought it was safe to sit up, and although she was still very much afraid, she had the arrogant thought that she had appeased the voodoo god. The serpent lifted from the bowl and peered at her again, swaying back and forth hypnotically. Ballah became paralyzed, not out of fear this time, but magic. The serpent was commanding her to open her mouth, and she felt her mouth unfreeze. Her lips trembled, but she didn't open them. Snap! "Okay," she cried, and opened her mouth slowly. A painful thump in her gums caused her to cry out in pain, as two fangs, just like the serpent's, grew in her mouth until they protruded over her bottom lips, long and sharp and deadly. The serpent continued to study her as more tears streamed down her face. It coiled, ready to lunge, and threw itself into the mouth of Ballah until she was forced to swallow it whole. A lump in her throat formed as the serpent slithered down into her belly, where something burst and seemed to spread throughout the rest of her body like tiny worms crawling inside of her. First, the squirming began in her chest, then it moved down to her fingers, and then her heart, and then head, and then it made its way down to her legs and finally her toes. The whirlwind of water fell in on Ballah and thrashed her frozen body around the pond like a lifeless stick. Soon, she couldn't breathe, and she knew she would drown if she didn't swim. But she couldn't tell which way was up. She tried to move her body, thrashing about until her fingers found the warm air around the pond. Ballah, the voice of her sister called for her. Hungry, Ballah sputtered blindly, choking on the air, filling her lungs and pushing the water out. Did it work? Hangbi asked, moving Ballah's dreadlocks out of her face and wiping what was left of the mud off of her. Ballah shook from the cold and nodded. I believe the Lao heard my plea, she shuddered, holding herself as she thought about the squirming she could still feel inside of her. Here, Hangbi said, you look like death. Hangbi's usually strong voice quivered as she threw a gold covering with white and blue embroidery on it over Ballah's shoulder. Ballah tried to thank her sister, but couldn't get it through due to the chattering of her teeth. Hangbi pulled Ballah into her chest, rubbing at her body for warmth. You are Ballah, princess of the Dahomey, Hangbi whispered, her voice getting stronger as she spoke. You are Ballah, the second general in command of the Mino, child of Webaja, and now holder of the Damballa spirit. No one will ever be your master. The end. Thank you guys for coming to my reading for Ballah's story. I'll stay on for a little bit longer. If you guys have some questions for me, feel free to put them in there. I just want to talk about the book, The Seeds of Revolution, for a minute. It's like, so in the dedication, I dedicated it to all of the people who were murdered and, killed, not even just this year, but just in the past and just in general for useless means, for no reason. And it really hit me this year during the riots and during the protests and all of that, how important these people are and how important their stories are and how powerful the Black voice can be when we lift up and we fight for these things. So it may not be like a real story that I'm telling in these short stories in this book, but it is from the heart, and it is about, rising up to fight for those people that you love and the people who have been pushed out of the way and forgotten about in the past few years as if they didn't matter. So, a lot of it came from the inspiration of Nina Simone. I didn't put that in the book, but a lot of these stories came from her. Like this story, I can't think of the song, but like I used to listen to it all the time. It was the scariest fucking song ever Nina Simone ever sung, but I loved it and I used to like just listen to it all the time. And it was, I think it was called Damballa. Yeah. So yeah, that was the inspiration for this particular story. Not all of them. Some of them don't really have a Nina Simone inspiration, but this one definitely did. So yeah, if nobody has any questions, I guess that is it for this live reading. I'm not going to give you too much. It's only a couple stories in the book and it's available on Kindle. So if you want to read more, then you can go ahead and go on Kindle and buy it. The hardcover will be available at the end of the year. Still working on some stuff, but yeah, thank you guys for joining me. I hope you liked my atmosphere, my fire, my music, my ninja outfit. So yeah, that was it. Thank you guys. When is the book available? It's available now on Kindle. So if you want to buy it now, you can buy it now. And the hardcover will be available. I don't want to give you guys a date because I really don't know at this moment. But the hardcover should be available by the end of the year. before New Year's or before Christmas at least. Yeah.